that money for foreclosure prevention will ultimately be ineffective, and that it will ultimately go to organizations like Mike Center for Responsible Lending and ACORN, which are all Democratic surrogates anyway. So it's a way of lining the pockets of the Democratic Party. But as you've also heard, the liberal and centrist press, is complicit in this, in the bad messaging. That is, we help to put out the popular myths and distribute these popular myths. For instance, this acceptance that subprime equals high risk. That does not challenge that very basic assumption. So I'm just going to read some of the examples of some of the conservative press. There's one blogger on openmarket.org. The headline, the title was, "Party Frank's Lame Excuse for Bailing Out Irresponsible Borrowers." Why on earth should Congress bail out subprime borrowers who took out bigger mortgages than they could afford, especially since some of them exaggerate their incomes to get their mortgages or borrow to live beyond their means so they could buy big houses and fancy cars? Yet many in Congress are moving to do just that. Nicole Galinas from the City Journal, "Effectless Foreclosure Fix." The Senate worked speedily last week to cook up a bipartisan rescue package for the nation's housing market. But as that market continues to correct and the economy churns, it's likely that the Foreclosure Prevention Act of 2008 is only the start. This $15 to $20 billion package may be just a down payment on what could become by Election Day a housing bill costing hundreds of billions of dollars. The $100 million of foreclosure prevention counseling is preordained to be ineffectual without an even larger taxpayer bailout. If you can't afford your mortgage, counseling won't help. And then there's "Don't Blame the Markets" by Jerry Bauer. The government compels banks to make loans in poor neighborhoods even if the applicants are considered prime borrowers. They know that banks are making loans to subprime borrowers, quote unquote, because the government is forcing them to do that. And they know if they don't make these loans, they will be punished severely by the regulators when they try to make a major change which is dependent on regulatory approval. And they know that pretty much every major change a traditional bank makes, in fact, subject to regulatory approval. So they grit their teeth and stamp a big inky yes on the application when they know, according to traditional financial standards, deserves a no. The fault lies with the small army of hard-left political hustlers who spent the early 1990s pushing risky mortgages on home lenders. And the fault lies especially with the legislators that give them the power to do so. So the fault is ours. How did we get here? We need to look at this in the context of redlining and unequal access to credit. We didn't just suddenly get here in the 80s. This is an extension of people being shut out of credit markets for decades. And it's part of what is being called the democratization of credit. That is, that's the justification for making these loans. That these people need these loans, that we're doing them a favor, and that if you cut out subprime lending, then in fact you will be breaking down the ability for people in low and moderate income neighborhoods and neighborhoods of color to access credit. What we've already heard described is a monumental failure of regulation, as well as a misconception of what subprime lending is and what actually happened. You've heard a little bit about that. So one of the first myths that we need to tackle is not all subprime loans are predatory, or AKA don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. That is, if you stamp down on predatory lending, then you run the risk again of denying access of credit to millions of people, and that there's something within subprime lending that is actually very useful.